Hi everyone, I'm Laura Tempest Zakroff, and this is 6 Minutes of Witchcraft. So in this episode, I'm going to cover something that I did in a live broadcast last night, kind of a surprise thing, talking about banned books. Unfortunately, my computer crashed partway through that stream, and there's some other technical issues, so I decided I'm just going to take that down and condense it into a 6 minutes, because I think it will be more helpful for more people in this format versus something that's kind of long and rambly and technically. So here we are. I set my alarm. So banned books. This is an important topic to discuss not only within witchcraft and occultism, but also on the larger scale. Recently, but it's not a new topic, occasionally see folks going around saying, oh, these are the people you shouldn't read. You shouldn't read these books. These are blacklisted or canceled or whatever language is being used. And personally, I haven't seen lists and I don't know who these folks are. I must be in a lovely little sphere of people who realize that banning books is fucked up. So thank you to my beautiful sphere of people. But realize that you might be existing outside of that and seeing these things and going, oh, why shouldn't I read these books, or know who these people are, etc. Why are they bad? And it got me thinking. I've been doing this a long time, and back in 1998-99 I created a list of recommended books on the Modern Tradition of Witchcraft website, and it's saying these books are good for various reasons. Not that they are the end-all be-all, but I think these are helpful for folks. But there's a lot more out there. And that's always been my mode of thinking, of saying, this is what I recommend versus saying, don't read this. Because you should be able to read whatever you want. And there are some important things to keep in mind when you are consuming reading and material. And that goes also to online content, pretty much any sort of media. And it's also funny to think, looking at that list now, it's still there, it's archived on the website. There are books that I wouldn't necessarily recommend right away because they haven't aged well. Or some of those folks have gone to a different path, or that material's been found to be just not as relevant to today as then. But I still would never say don't read these books and don't read anything by these people, because I think it's important to understand context and how things have developed. But along with that list, I have a few points that I stress to folks who are looking at the book list. And the first one is that to really understand witchcraft and to really understand how it works, particularly for yourself, is you need to both study it, but also allow yourself to experience it. So reading and watching videos and such is not the end-all be-all of a witchcraft practice, but I assume that you already know this. But it's a good reminder, right, that the world is not limited to books. It has to be experienced. The next point is you need to be able to form your own opinions, right? I can tell you what I recommend, but you still should have the freedom and the power to decide what works for you and what doesn't work for you, because this is your path. You're not walking my path, you're walking your path. So ultimately your opinion is going to be the deciding one, and that also can change by when you learn more material. I also recommend that you should read everything you can get your hands on. That's the good and the bad. And why is that? Because you want to be able to get different viewpoints, reading books that are written in the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, even the early O's versus what's being read today, and looking at the timeline, looking at when they were written and these situations, understanding the history, the context is so important, and it influences so much of what we do today and what we continue to change and update. So while something that was written as a feminist witchcraft book in 1970 might seem like uber feminist and like not very inclusive to a wider range of people, you have to understand the time it was written and how might it change today. These are things to keep in mind. There's also folks who have found some folklore and then realized that was based on a misinterpretation, and so things have to be retranslated and considered new information is found. So that's important, which gets us to the next point, which is just because it's been published doesn't mean it's accurate, right? Lots of things can go into print. I know within my realm, there's a lot of fact-checking that happens at Llewellyn. I know it's surprising to some people who haven't picked up a Llewellyn book since the 1990s, but there is a lot of fact-checking and confirmation that goes on where did this come from, what is the source, and that's why I have bibliographies and resources in most, if not all, of my books. There's always resources. Some things aren't big enough to have an extensive bibliography. But just keep in mind, things you read, things you hear, things you see, not always an accurate representation. Next point of that is to make sure that you go outside just looking at the occult or witchcraft magical practitioner shelf or realm or sphere. So when you're looking, especially for books, go to anthropology, go to folklore, go to the fiction section as well. I know it sounds kind of crazy, but sometimes I would say there are some fiction authors who get that sense of magic better than it's explained in some nonfiction books. That's not saying that you should absorb fiction and consider that's your whole practice, but understand the feelings of art that's created, the same way we look at music and we look at visual art as well. And let's see, the last little point in here. Yes. Keep an open, skeptical mind for everything that you read. This is the proverbial shaker of salt to bring with you is, consider what is the context, what's being said, when was it being said, who is it being said to, and does it work for you? You can read a wide range of topics. You don't have to read simply what is in your immediate area. If you want to focus on Wicca, if you want to focus on traditional witchcraft, if you're looking at Druidry, if you're looking at an African tradition, like all of these different things, like it's good to know about all of these different paths. So even if you're following this one, knowing what people are doing in these other areas can be really enlightening, because as human beings, we often come to similar, not necessarily exact, but similar solutions to our common problems. And so we see similar magical solutions and rituals and practices, and it's because they've often generated on their own because of how the human brain works that we're looking for these solutions. And the Witch's Cauldron, I talk about how pretty much every culture on the world, on the planet, has a type of cauldron, because it is a problem that needed a solution. So it's not like cauldron started in just one place and people brought that cauldron all around the world. Like, yes, there's an exchange of commerce and such, and ideas and materials and shapes and different ways of working with them, but each has their own generation. So knowing and understanding these practices doesn't mean, if you're reading about them, it doesn't mean it's immediately becoming part of your practice, but you are expanding your knowledge and your wisdom base. So those are the big points I want to get across. And also, just in general, when folks are telling you what you shouldn't read and who you shouldn't read, it's a big red flag, right? Why are they trying to direct you away from other sources? Why are they trying to set themselves up as the only resource or the only judge of what's good or bad? Like, there are so many different layers of nuance and understanding and possibilities. So there are good books and bad books. But for who and for what, and understanding why something might not be accurate or relative to you, that's up for you to decide. And in thinking about the larger context, especially here in the United States with banning of books, this happens on a cycle, and it's not just the Nazis in Germany banning books and burning books, particularly books that were about queer culture and art and all these different ideas that were dangerous to the regime, right? We see that in the excuse about critical race theory is like understanding what happens to other people builds compassion. Yeah. It feels bad to read about what happened, especially within the United States, any point of history, to look what's happened to indigenous people, what's happened to black people, what's happened to Mexican people in this country, right? You should feel bad, but it's not a bad thing into itself to read about other people's experiences, even if they're not your own, because it broadens your ability and capacity for compassion, for understanding, for looking outside of your own experience. So whether we're looking at this from a small witchcraft occult sphere to the larger sphere of humanity, we always need to be learning and feeling, exploring, and getting outside of our own context to see how other people are practicing. And I guarantee that will always expand your knowledge, your wisdom, and your capacity for magic and empowerment. So I hope you found this helpful. If you have any questions, leave them in the comments below. All right, thank you so much. Bye.